I'm so happy to be with all of you here today. Alexandra, it's such a pleasure to see you again, my friend. What a great day this is. This is a great day, a great week for democracy. And I'm going to try to give you, to begin with, a little bit of a different perspective, because you all have been working very hard on every detail of this gorgeous new piece of legislation. So I'm gonna come at this from a slightly different level, the airplane view down. And what I want to say is that to those of you who spent an early Brussels spring debating the final shape of the Digital Services Act, and those who stood by eager for the outcome, and even for those who were never even paying attention, hear this. The Digital Services Act is not just another legislative drudge on Brussels' endless conveyor belt of words. It is a bold reckoning with history. The first comprehensive declaration of a democratic digital future founded on the legitimate authority of democratic rights and rule of law. And as a brief personal footnote, I will say that I've been waiting for this for 40 years, and I could not be happier, more inspired, and more grateful. In defiance of the extraordinary wealth and unaccountable social power of the tech giants and their growing institutional order, the secret massive scale extraction of human generated data, which is the source of that wealth and power, in defiance of their profit driven corruption of information flows that are mission critical to every democratic society, and in defiance of their relentless annexation of human rights and democratic governance functions. And under the shadow of the murderous Russian assault on the Ukrainian people and their democracy, the European member states, their parliament, the EU Commission, and the European Council together set ablaze the beacons that rim the mountain peaks and proclaimed to the world that democracy is back. For the first time in 2 decades, since the origins of surveillance capitalism at the turn of the 21st century, there is hope that the principles of a self-governing demos might survive the digital century. And that is a hope that until now, we had no justification for. For the last 2 decades, democracy ceded our critical connected information and communication spaces to the private corporations which grew into the surveillance capitalist empires. This was an act of democratic self-evisceration, and self-evisceration at the expense of the most central functions of an information society in an information civilization. And yet this has been our fate for the last 2 decades. And if we ask ourselves the question, why is it that one man can take out his wallet and purchase a significant chunk of those connected information and communication spaces that are critical to our societies? The answer is there in the 2 decades that our lawmakers, especially in the United States of America, my beloved country, ceded control, consciously, voluntarily ceded control to private capital to run and regulate, to set the rules, the norms, and the values of these spaces. As a result, we have ended up in a zero-sum game where the deepening order of anti-democratic surveillance economics propagates democratic disorder. And when we look at it from this vantage point, I think it is accurate to say that surveillance capitalism's current rise to dominance can be understood as an epistemic counter-revolution, an anti-democratic coup expressed in the assumption of authority over the constitution and production of knowledge, as well as the power that accrues to such knowledge and protects that authority. The only institutional order capable of contradicting, which is to say, threatening, obstructing, undermining, interrupting, and outlawing surveillance capitalism's knowledge dominance is the liberal democratic state backed by its legitimate authority and legislative powers. Surveillance capitalism's continued institutionalization depends upon meeting the challenges of successive and deepening contradictions with its grizzled but still potent antagonist, democracy. And though surveillance capitalism is the younger challenger, it has shown us that it embodies novel strengths that have been able to overpower and surprise a defenseless society. Democracy is the old and slow incumbent, that is true, but it brings advantages that are difficult to rival. These include the ability to inspire democratic action, the ability to inspire fear in adversaries, and most formidable, the legitimate authority and requisite power to make, impose, and enforce the democratic rule of law based on cherished values, ideals, and principles. That is not nostalgia. That is survival. That is the possibility of a democratic and a human digital future. This democratic resurgence that you have led is long overdue. And as your friend from America, I thank you for leading the way. I want to stress in closing that it is very important for all of us to remember, to know, to internalize that this is the beginning of a multi-phase democratic response that will take us through this decade, at least. There will be triumphs and there will be setbacks. What the DSA accomplishes is precisely what had to be accomplished in phase one. It breaks the sound barrier of inevitability. The corporation's complacency, their audacity, their ability to do whatever they want to do, to take whatever they want to take, free of law, free of obstruction. That day is over. It breaks the sound barrier on the people's resignation and helplessness. Those are now behind us. They're part of an earlier chapter in this narrative. We have turned the page. We are in a new part of the story. What the Digital Services Act does is that critical action. Some of you may have heard me say this before. In fact, I might have said it the last time we're together because I'm obsessed with it. Because we are, as the Titanic, heading for the iceberg of a digital future that is ruled by computational governance and anti-democratic forces, a fundamentally anti-democratic social order. But what you have done with the Digital Services Act, whatever the failings or the incompleteness that still frustrates you, what you have done is to turn the Titanic away from the iceberg. And all you have to do is keep going. All we have to do is keep going until we get to the shore where that democratic digital future is within sight. What the Digital Services Act does is it assigns the digital to democracy's house, where it always should have been. Now the digital lives in democracy's house, expected to be a contributing, both in finances, brilliant, but also in joy, a contributing, joyful member of our family. It creates the possibility for the first time in 20 years that the true fruits of the digital age, knowledge, problem solving, will finally be returned to the people to meet the challenges of our communities, our families, and our planet. It opens the space for democracy enhancing innovation. Enough of this performative talk of innovation that has only led to powerful monopolies on the entire market structure of knowledge production and consumption. The success that is still within our reach in this decade depends upon our Realpolitique, our sense of the Realpolitique, and that must start now with you. That begins with a recognition that everything we are talking about is not a story about technology. This is a story about power. And you must be fearless in asserting the democratic power that is required to do battle in this zero-sum game. The issues are not just regulation. Regulation takes a thing and it tries to make it a little bit better, a little bit less egregious. It tries to mitigate a thing. We need a different understanding, not regulation, but reinvention. Because everything about this institutional order is founded on the illegitimate and illicit bed of sand that is the secret massive scale extraction of human generated data, which is the foundation for every other social harm that you have talked about, every other social harm addressed in this legislation, whether it is the wholesale ability to manipulate collective and individual behavior, or the dire, urgent problem of corrupt information overtaking information integrity, with the scourges of disinformation that are destabilizing our societies and our institutions. The powers that you have accrued to the Digital Services Act create the conditions for this Realpolitique. But the very first thing that has to be addressed is that the Digital Services Act must be funded with all of the resources, financial and human, to get this job done. We are not going to have another chance. We are not going to have another chance to go around this circle and grab the ring. We've got to get this foundation right that the Digital Services Act lays for us and move on from there, because there is still more work to done, because there is still more work to get done to move us to the right place if we are going to end this century with a democratic and digital future. You've talked about so many of these key pieces that have to be put into place: opening the black box, the transparency, allowing us democratic officials, the folks who are going to come into the new institutions created by the DSA, and be able to open up the hood and look inside and monitor and judge and assess, and the researchers who will be able to do the same for the first time. That opening up the black box is a fundamental shot across the bow to the secrecy, AKA surveillance, which is at the core of their reproductive power. And so this is tremendously important. It is vital, it is critical. But without the funding and the people, it will not happen. Centralized authority, married and in collaboration to the authority in the member states. We need it all, and it has to be real and powerful, because this is a battle for the future. You talk about liability. You talk about ending the free flowing of corrupt information. You talk about illegal content. All of these things are essential because they establish that cyberspace was always a pernicious myth. There is no place that is free from the laws of our societies. There never was, there never should have been, and it was a dangerous rhetoric that had many people gaslighted for many years, but that day too is done. And finally, I want to call attention to the difference between what is illegal and what is unprecedented. With the end of the myth of cyberspace, we say that everything that is already illegal for all of us in our lives is already illegal in the digital, and that will be enforced. That is a necessary and crucial and long overdue step. At the same time, I want us to recognize that much of what we face today is unprecedented. And because it is unprecedented, it has not had time to become illegal. It is illegitimate, it is illicit, it should be illegal, and it must be made illegal. Ultimately, if we are going to stare down all of the harms that we've been discussing so far, we are going to have to reckon with the pervasive, self-authorized, secret, massive scale extraction of human-generated data, which is the cause of the wholesale destruction of privacy that we have seen on a global basis, which is the cause of the epistemic chaos, the vast corruption of information, which is tearing our societies apart. This cannot stand. And ultimately, in order to solve these downstream social harms, we are going to have to work our way upstream to these foundational atrocities and learn how to interrupt and outlaw them. Why? For the sake of an equilibrium between our digital age and our aspirations for democracy, for the sake of opening up space for the brilliant kind of innovation that we all crave, that will advance our ideals and our form of government. And finally, what is there left to say but that every people in every country, every child today and every teenager, when we look at every artist and what is being produced from every domain of the art world, what we see in every direction are people projecting a dystopian future. Our children, our young adults, our artists, and people all over the world, because we have stumbled into a future that none of us wanted and none of us would have chosen. This future is our accidental dystopia. And with the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, and finally, a GDPR that gets enforced with all the might and muscle of the European Union, we can change that fate. You are on your way. Do not falter. Celebrate and fight on. Thank you.